go for mute, please. Right, that's great. Good evening, everybody. Evening to everybody who's made it here on this windy, rainy night, and Happy New Year, and welcome to Radical Anthropology Spring Term. And good evening to everybody joining us again on Zoom. So tonight, we are talking about some big subjects: menopause and matriarchy in killer whales and humans. That's going to spread out to maybe whales, in a few more whales than killer whales, perhaps. I hope there's no whale biologists in the audience, because I will feel distinctly rocky. I'm an anthropologist, not a whale biologist, but we're going to do our best here today. And we were inspired to, which is Lucy Cook's book, that one. We're inspired to this subject by this wonderful book. You're seeing it the wrong way round, aren't you? Lucy Cook's Bitch. Lucy Cook was going to come last term, but she had a car breakdown and didn't make it. She is going to be back at the speaking here at the end of this term on March 28th. So we're really looking forward to that. But we were inspired by her chapter on grandmothering and the trying to work out the evolution of menopause, discussing killer whales. Now, Lucy Cook's book is particularly strong on showing how evolutionary science, evolutionary biology has been full of patriarchal prejudice, and that has meant it has failed to see and understand female strategies, female sexual strategies, various female strategies for mating and gaining resources and reproducing to the next generation. And tonight we are going to be, particularly, I'm going to let Chris start this off. We're going to be talking about, I think you should come and take over really, Chris. We're going to be talking about the patriarchal prejudices that have got in the way of our understanding kinship systems, how kinship systems for humans may have evolved, and the sort of difficulties that has presented, patriarchy has presented in anthropology. So you want to take over. Chris, you go.
Okay, so yes, so as Camilla said, this is a marvelous book. It's not just wonderfully enlightening, but it's beautifully written. And the author was taught by none other than Richard Dawkins of Selfish Gene fame. And so while being a real up-to-date genetic scholar, Lucy is making it very clear that a lot of things which Darwin said are just absolutely not science. They're pure prejudice and ideology. And although we can sort of say, oh, well, that was the 19th century, the point she's making is that it carries on. There's a sort of doctrine, which is the standard doctrine in most branches of evolutionary biology. And it all stems, as she points out, from what was called Bateman's principle. It goes back a few decades, the middle of the last century, when this guy, Bateman, was studying fruit flies. And the finding was that with fruit flies, the males are very active, wanting sex with anything that moves kind of thing. And the female fruit flies was just sort of waiting there to be impregnated and not having to do anything too intelligent. And from that was extrapolated the idea that in so many cases, the female of the species is kind of not too intelligent, that doesn't have a lot to do. She just needs to get pregnant and look after the babies. And the really interesting sex is the male. And what Lucy points out is that even when scholars like Patricia Garrity, but of course many other feminist scholars, scientists, sometimes I don't want to say feminist scholars, it's almost as if I'm saying people are feminists as opposed to scientists. But unlike other scientists who aren't prejudiced, have pointed out that pedagogy, those particular experiments on fruit flies were deeply flawed. But even so, the fruit flies aren't whales, they aren't humans, and there's all sorts of differences. She's just pointing out that there's a kind of doctrine. Darwin started off with a doctrine that the reason why all these clever books are written by men is because men are more intelligent than women. And so I suppose what's just absolutely beautiful is this whole book, just going through point by point by point by point, just pointing out where you have ideological doctrine and where you have science. And it's just such a compelling, refreshingly compelling book. Right, so in our title this evening is matriarchy. That's the first word. I can't remember what the title is now, but it seems to have gone. But anyway, we're talking about matriarchy and killer whales in connection with extended post-reproductive lifespan. In humans, we call that menopause. And let's just stay for a little while with this topic of matriarchy. I imagine a lot of you know this, but I know that some people don't. Throughout the last part of the 19th century, the overwhelming consensus, as far as human history was concerned, or as far as the human case, the history of the family and kinship was concerned, pretty much everyone agreed that early human kinship was matrilineal. It didn't necessarily mean that early society was matriarchal, but it mostly meant that women would tend to live with mum, have their solidarity with their mother and their sisters, that the descent of traditions and maybe property, if there was property, would be passed down through the female line. And the whole idea of primitive matriarchy, it was often called primitive matriarchy because it belonged to the distant prehistoric past, was kind of standard mainstream theory. What happened was that Lewis Henry Morgan, the founder of kinship studies, an American lawyer who defended the Iroquois and other Indians, he became adopted into the Iroquois tribe, wrote a whole book called Ancient Society, as well as another very, very famous book, which most people regard as the sort of foundation of kinship studies, called Systems of Kinship and Sanguinity in the Human Family. He argued that if you look at all the different societies around the world, look at their kinship systems, you'll always find that there tended to be the moving from matrilineal to patrilineal, maybe matrilocal residence, that means living with mum, to patrilocal residence, meaning living with dad. And it was kind of the standard model, the standard theory. In a way, unfortunately, although I don't see it wasn't really their fault, two very radical social scientists and political activists, one called Karl Marx, the other called Friedrich Engels, they realized that this was almost certainly true and made it part of their own idea. And their idea was that their vision of a future socialist society would be in some sense a return to this original society of equality between the sexes and sharing communism, including this element of matriarchy. And of course, what then happened was that in the previous period, the establishment had sort of said, oh, well, it's okay to talk about communism or matriarchy or something if it's in some savage tribe somewhere else. You know, we've evolved so far since then. We've now got Victorian civilization, the pinnacle of civilization. We've moved so far from all this kind of weird stuff that went on in primitive times. But what happened was that we had the First World War, then you had these rumblings around the Russian Revolution, you had the rise of feminism, and it then seemed as if Western society wasn't so obviously a pinnacle of civilization, and it became felt to be important by sort of guardians of morals, I suppose, and family values and basic values. It began to seem important to state that actually the nuclear family, male dominance, private property, these things were just part of the way things are, part of human nature, couldn't be changed, and therefore it could not be true, kind of on doctrinal grounds, that early human society could have had anything to do with matrilineal descent or matriarchy. And I just want to make this point really clear. Modern Western anthropology, in many ways, anthropology is an academic discipline, certainly in this country, but much more widely, stemmed from just down the road, the London School of Economics, where somebody called Bronislaw Malinowski, who, by the way, did some wonderful work, field work during the First World War, in the Trobriand Islands. I mean, in my view, you just almost have to read his beautiful work on these avunculocal but matrilineal people. He decided that it was his moral duty as an anthropologist to make certain claims about this theory of primitive communism, maybe including elements of sexual communism, and certainly elements of the family extending into wider kinship links, including matriarchy. So I'll just read out what Malinowski said in the 30s. And what I want you to hear here is that we have a scientist, we have an anthropologist, Bronislaw Malinowski, almost the founder of modern anthropology. And I want you to hear what Lucy Cook's talking about. I want you to hear, it's pretty hard not to hear it, politics. So here we have Malinowski, and he's referring to a book called The Mothers by Briefer, but also by Bachofen, Das Mutterrecht, one of these 19th century books celebrating this idea of early human matriarchy. So, okay, a whole school of anthropologists have maintained that the maternal clan was the primitive domestic institution. In my opinion, as you know, this is entirely incorrect. But an idea like that, once it is taken seriously and applied to modern conditions, becomes positively dangerous. I believe that the most disruptive element in the modern revolutionary tendencies is the idea that parenthood can be made collective. If once we came to the point of doing away with the individual family as the pivotal element of our society, we should be faced with a social catastrophe compared with which the political upheaval of the French Revolution and the economic changes of Bolshevism are insignificant. The question, therefore, as to whether group motherhood is an institution which ever existed, whether it is an arrangement which is compatible with human nature and social order, is of considerable practical interest. I can't help mentioning here that early human parenthood was collective. I mean, everyone knows that now. Sarah Hrdy, Mothers and Others, she's an extremely authoritative evolutionary biologist. She's made clear.
We're going on to that. We're going on to that in the talk.
Okay, we're going on to that in the talk. We wouldn't even be here with our large brains if mothers hadn't had support from each other and if parenthood hadn't been collective. Anyway, this is going to come up later. Thank you, Camilla. Right. I just want to finish off by saying from this quote, this, by the way, is in a book called Grandmotherhood, Evolutionary Significance for the Second Half of Female Life. And I'm reading from a chapter in this book by Knight and Camilla Power. I'm quite proud of this chapter. But Malinowski went on to declare, I would rather discount any speculation about the origins of marriage or anything else than contribute to them even indirectly. He said, basically, I know what human origins was like in terms of the family, but don't go there. Don't even discuss it. I don't want you to think about it at all. But I can tell you what you would find if you did do the research, which is that the nuclear family was primary and the man was dominant over the family. Despite this, Malinowski's mission statement was to prove to the best of my ability that marriage and the family have been, are, and will remain the foundations of human society. And he argued that marriage in single pairs, monogamy in the sense in which Westermarck and I are using it, is primeval. This guy, Westermarck, argued that monkeys and apes are monogamous, which is absolutely far from the truth. some sort of vague exceptions, I suppose. And that because monkeys and apes are monogamous, therefore, the natural thing would be for humans to be strictly monogamous. Okay, now that happened, and then as a result of what Malinowski's enormous influence throughout almost the whole of the 20th century, you couldn't really. The word matriarchy was essentially taboo, and I just want to now quote here from
quite a famous book,
a very famous book published last year, 2 years ago. Sorry, The Dawn of Everything. A New History of Humanity by a friend of mine, David Graeber, who sadly died just after this book was published. David Graeber and David Wengrow, and they discuss the whole issue of matriarchy. Okay, they just give a few examples of what seem to have certainly been in early history, Neolithic societies, perhaps examples of it. I'll just read a little bit out. By far the most frequent depictions of authority figures in Minoan art show adult women in boldly patterned skirts that extend over their shoulders but are open at the chest. Women are regularly depicted at a larger scale than men, the sign of political superiority in the visual tradition of all neighboring lands. They hold symbols of command, like the staff-wielding mother of mountains, who appears on seal impressions from a major shrine at Knossos. They perform fertility rites before horned altars, sit on thrones, meet together in assemblies with no male presiding, and appear flanked by supernatural creatures and dangerous animals. Most male depictions, on the other hand, are either of scantily clad or naked athletes. No women are depicted naked in Minoan art, or show men bringing tribute and adopting poses of subservience before female dignitaries. Now, in RAG, we are not saying that there were too many in the past, certainly among hunter-gatherers, rigorously matriarchal societies where women were dominant over men. We don't really, I don't think that, and Camilla doesn't think that either. But we do certainly think that in really significant levels of gender egalitarianism were the norm for early hunter-gatherers. And also we think that was more likely a kind of periodicity, what Mona Finnegan terms communism in motion, moments when women exercising primary ritual power, singing and dancing, and, you know, in that sense, playfully exercising power, but we had a rhythm. So women would happily give way to the men to do their thing, and then it go back to women, and we have this, as I say, communism in motion. But anyway, what we now find, and this is just what this is what they say that in this book, they're saying that the degree of erasure of any idea that women can exercise power has just been rubbed out. And again, I'll just read this out. It's become the equivalent of a no-go zone for subsequent generations, talking about matriarchy. It's hard to avoid the impression that something is going on here. The degree of erasure has been extraordinary and far more than is warranted by mere suspicion of an overstated or outdated theory. Among academics today, belief in primitive matriarchy is treated as a kind of intellectual offense, almost on a par with scientific racism, and its exponents have been written out of history. So this topic, matriarchy, is of that kind. It's where humans are concerned, one does not discuss that kind of thing. Okay. You want me to stop soon, Camilla, or go into primates?
No, we are doing whales tonight.
Not primates at all. Okay.
Not until later.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to take over. Let's have some science, shall we? After all that. So I'm thankful if there's no whale biologist, but if there is anybody with whale expertise, pull me up if I'm saying anything stupid, because obviously we're anthropologists. But what's really interesting is that the whale biologists and ecologists have been looking at species of whales, toothed whales, who have, well, I've called it menopause here in brackets, in quote marks, but menopause is a little bit of a misnomer, actually, because, oh, can I get that? Oh, sorry, I think I can do it with the mouse. There we are, but I'm not big enough. Why am I not fitting the screen? Can people see that clearly? It's kind of, no, it needs to go a bit wider, doesn't it? Maybe I should just not fit it that wide. Sorry, I'm trying to be too clever. No, don't do that. It's all right, we'll get there in the end. Oh, don't. No. I'm gonna just, let me try.
Camilla, can you not just get the percentage down from 150 at the top?
Oh, the top, thank you. Where is that? Which top?
Follow, that's
Where?
it, that's it. Ah, you're there. Top, right. That's it. You've got
Oh,
100%.
there, sorry. Yeah, you've done, that's where it is. Thank you. Just never sure where's that. 125 work? That works. That looks okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, let's do. So the whale biologists have been using whales as potential models for the evolution of menopause in humans. And yet, just as I, as an anthropologist, don't know a lot about whale biology, unfortunately, the whale ecologists also don't know very much up to date in terms of hunter-gatherer kind of kinship and residence. So this is where we kind of need to inform each other very strongly. why isn't menopause quite the right word here is that the whale species that are now known to have post-reproductive lifespans, they spend half or a third at least of their lifespans not with reproductive cycles, not ovulating, not fertile. They have estrous cycles, they do not have menstrual cycles. So we have this bunch of menstruating species, monkeys, apes, some bat species, possibly the elephant shrew, and the poor spiny mouse that's now been discovered to be menstruating, but that poor mouse is going to be tested and tested to destruction, that poor mouse. The whale species have post-reproductive lifespans. There is one species now living which is intersecting menstruation, menstrual cycles with post-reproductive lifespans, and that's us, Homo sapiens. And we can talk about extinct humans potentially as well. Okay, so just to clarify that, so I'm going to use the mouthful post-reproductive lifespan, but a lot of the whale builders do say menopause for short, and it's obviously a bit more sexy, matriarchy and menopause rather than matriarchy and post-reproductive lifespan. So let's just have a little look at the date. Well, which of the whale species, and this is a nice big chart of the phylogeny, the family tree of, I hope you can see that clearly enough, of the toothed whales, including lots of dolphins and porpoises, various sperm whales, beaked whales, all kinds of, so killer whales and the short-finned, I don't know why that's giving me a, why can't I use the arrow here, short-finned pilot whale. So somewhere up here, up at this node, or we've got an evolution of menopause of post-reproductive lifespans for killer whales in there, and another evolution of it, presumably from the ancestor of long-finned and short-finned pilot whales, who are very close relatives, but only one of them actually has a post-reproductive lifespan. And then we got these two closely related species, and actually belugas and narwhals, very interesting. They are sister species, and presumably in their ancestor, post-reproductive lifespan evolved. For the other guys, they are showing a decline of fertility with decline of life systems. It's like that. And we can actually, that's a paper from Ellis et al. 2018, and we can, and taken from this paper, well, first of all, if I can go up high enough, this is just showing the difference between long-finned and short-finned pilots. And you can see there the, oh, it's not very bright. I hope you can see it. You guys see? We've got a line here, which is the pregnancy and fertility rate, and ovarian activity over age. So it's just going down quite gradually, but with the short-finned, it comes right down on a sort of cliff edge, and then it's flatline. It flatlines for about 20 odd years out of, that's almost half. It's a third to a half of the lifespan. And with all these other species, so these are belugas, it's getting on for like half up there, half of the lifespan that is non-reproductive. The narwhals, quite similar. The short-fin pilot whale maybe more like a third on that basis. So we're not talking about just a slowdown of reproduction. We're talking about a very definite halting of reproduction in favor of preserving future life. So we've got some pictures there for some of the, that's a short fin pilot, this is the killer whales. And just to compare, a few of these charts, these are a bit more visible. So these are two hunter-gatherer populations, Ashe, Paraguay, Jucasi, or Hong. And that's the fertility curve, and that's the life history survival curve. And you can see it's absolutely separated. The menopause the ending before 50 or so, and the lifespan is, don't anybody think that hunter-gatherers aren't living with a potential lifespan into the 70s. That's quite normal for hunter-gatherers. And we see chimps and elephants, as Asian elephants, fertility and survival go down together. There is no sign of any menopause for chimps or elephants. But these are our famous whales again. It's the long fin who don't have. The short fin does have flat line fertility. And that's the resident killer whales. Killer whales, it's almost more than half of the lifespan is non-reproductive. It's pretty extraordinary. Okay, so I'm now going to ask Chris to tell us, these whales have post-reproductive lifespan. What are they doing with it? Tell us about the killer whales.
Well, as Lucia Cook says in her wonderful chapter, chapter 9 of her book, she went to Seattle, and there was this group called the Residents, group of killer whales, and initially, because initially it was thought that like a lot of the whales looked like females, and it was assumed that they must have a kind of harem system. There must be an alpha male and a harem of females. And then it was gradually noticed that over time, it didn't take very long actually, the so-called female whales morphed into males. And so that somehow everyone had made a big mistake in their thinking that these whales were like sea lions or various other aquatic mammals, where you do have an alpha male with a sort of whole harem of females. So that completely puzzled everybody. And then it was worked out that actually the effective pods of these killer whales were matrilineal, led by a matriarch, a female. This female lived till about, I think, about 120, 130. And what she did, she had an extraordinary accumulation of cultural knowledge of how to forage, where the salmon were, how to catch them, and had these whales been acting sort of separately, each going their own way, they would have starved. There's no way you can hunt salmon that way. You have to know exactly where they are. You have to surround them. You have to do quite clever tricks to make sure that you can get a big harvest of this incredibly fat, nourishing fish. So we have a matriarch, a matrilineal clan system, and one of the things that was noticed was that the matriarchs are closer to their sons than to their daughters. I don't know how much, Camilla, you want me to go into that whole topic, but essentially the males would pop away from their pod, have sex somewhere else, get somebody else pregnant in another pod.
Well, they
come
have
back.
meetings, the pods, they have like little parties.
So they come together, they separate, they come together, and when they come together, quite a bit of sex goes on. But the point is that the matriarch is in charge of a clan, which includes their sons and grandsons, as well as their daughters and granddaughters. And we're now going to go to the Weddell seal.
Right. So you're just talking about the Seattle Southern residents, and now we want to look at if we can find it.
Incredibly clever things that these whales get up to in order to hunt.
So yeah, we're looking at, I mean, many of you may have seen this, but it's just worth seeing again. This is down in Antarctica.
Spreading out the spy hop to search the ice floes. When a seal is spotted, the scouts alert the family with a rallying call. If they are to catch a seal resting on such a large piece of ice, the hunters need to change their tactics. This time, they produce a subsurface wave. The pieces. But the seal still has a raft and appears to be protected from any oncoming wave. The matriarch whale, however, had a plan. Working in a coordinated way, the pod pushed the seal's ice platform into clearer water. The matriarch now tries another tactic which will avoid injury. Blowing bubbles. They disorientate the towering seal. And the whales move in for the kill. Only about 100 killer whales in the world hunt using this technique. It's an ingenious solution to the problem of finding prey here in the most extreme frozen habitat on Earth.
You got it.
Unfortunately, our
That's
special
fantastic.
magic system doesn't
Well,
seem
no,
to work.
no, that system is for the Zoom.
It's only for the Zoom people, it's ISIS, so, yeah, ISIS,
Okay.
right.
Right, and I'm going to go back on to. So,
So, well, I don't know,
well,
just
wait,
think of Darwin's statement about the female of the species and the Bateman's principle and females not being so clever as males. These creatures are the biggest brains of any creature apart from humans. And in the case of these killer whales, the female brain is actually more large and more complex body size and more complex than the male. Because of course the female has to do so much more complicated stuff because she has to lead. You need all this particular social intelligence.
You cannot hear Chris, by the way.
sorry.
We can't hear Chris. We can't hear him.
Yeah, you kind of.
Well, just said that in this case with the killer whales, the female is more. I mean, these whales have huge brains compared with body size, bigger than any other creature, any other mammal, with the exception of humans. In the case of these killer whales, the female brain is somewhat larger, significantly larger, and more complex than the brain of the male, because of course it's the female who has to do the most clever stuff. She has to keep the pod together. She has to remember, cultural tricks, and that explains why her intelligence is superior to the intelligence of the male.
Okay, so cultural, ecological repositories, and all these this knowledge of the terrain, this organization of social life is what seems to be going on with these matriarch whales, talking about killer whales, but there's evidence for this in the other whale species as well. Narwhals, for instance, they've been able to find out that the genetics of narwhals, the DNA genetics of narwhal groups corresponds to particular feeding grounds, so that it is passing down matrilineally transmitted both genetically and culturally, the knowledge of where to find feeding. And of course, groups like narwhals and also the beluga have incredible problems of sort of navigation under the Arctic ice, these Arctic whales. They're particularly needing to have a very good geographic knowledge of how to be able to breathe and to be able to navigate under these frozen ice seas. So what are the explanations that the whale biologists have come up with to why are these older females prepared to give up reproduction for half their lifespan even though they're taking on this very prominent role, in terms of genetics, in terms of selfish genes, you know, it's as always, having an offspring is always going to be closer to you in terms of carrying the genetic, replicating genes into the future than letting your daughter have the offspring, which is what is happening with the killers, in particular the killers here. And so what's been argued is that there is what's said to be an asymmetry of costs between the young females and the older females that can explain this. Now, this depends on the fact that the killer whale pods the mothers keep their sons, and their sons are a very important part of their genetic legacy. Now, the daughters and the mothers are potentially in competition for resources. The resources required to raise killer whale offspring over long, long time periods. They have long interbirth intervals, 4 to 5 years. We're producing very rich milk. And these are huge resources. Remember those big brains, just as hominins have very big brains. But in the case of males, the sons, he's just having a party with the next group along and pushing the costs all over onto that other group. Okay, so for the grandma, the matriarch whale, encouraging her son to live as long as possible and have as much sex with the other group who's going to raise the costly offspring is a good strategy for her. And what the argument about asymmetry of costs is that basically as a female gets older and older in the group, she becomes more related to the other members of the group compared to a daughter of hers, who's basically mainly related to her own offspring. And that daughter, that younger daughter, will be much more prepared to fight for resources and is going to win reproductive conflict with an older female who is more evenly related to the whole group. So this is the idea of asymmetry of costs. It's just for an older female to breed at the same time as a younger female is just it's going to cost her too much, and the younger female is going to win that one. So in that case, halting reproduction and doing other things that are very important for the survival of the pod becomes important. Now it's very suspicious with the sons because there is material to suggest that there's research saying the sons will die within a year of the mother's death. And you think, how is this happening? These are younger whales. Why do they die within a year of their mother's death? And you've got to be a bit suspicious that maybe his sisters, the daughters in the pod, don't really want him around. They want their sons in that kind of privileged position. And so we don't actually know what happens, but probably, yeah, they don't want him around. You can see what killers can do if they don't want. Okay, so this is the asymmetry of cost model. Kinship dynamics is what it's called. How does kinship dynamics, how does relatedness change through an individual's life history, and how does that change their strategies? Okay, so let's now switch over to humans and the grandmother hypothesis. And I'm not really let me move this out. So I've got, give me the arrow, please. The arrow. Oh, yeah.
You need to close the fill and sign function.
No, that's okay. Close the which
that's it there, Camilla. You were there.
Yeah, it's on the right top corner.
The right top where
there's a blue button called next, and then next to it is a close. So click on close.
Under. Oh, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Have I got it right? I'm just trying to size it as much as possible today. Okay, so the grandmother hypothesis originated before Sarah Hrdy's great book, Mothers and Others, in 2009. The grandmother hypothesis going back into the 90s, late 90s particularly. But the two ideas, I mean, Sarah Hrdy's building very much on Hawkes, O'Connell, Blurton-Jones' grandmother hypothesis. Sarah Hrdy arguing that we became cooperative breeding apes. Basically, we were babysitting apes. We could look after each other's offspring with allocare, and this did extraordinary things to change our psychology and help us evolve into
About that,
subject.
just say that, you know, when I was reading out from Bronislaw Malinowski, he said,
Right.
if women needed other women to look after the babies, that would be a disaster, worse than the Russian Revolution. And we now know that actually we became human because women were living with their mum, sharing childcare with mum, sharing childcare with sisters, and this whole idea of alloparenting is the condition of being able to afford to raise such.
Well,
costly sperm
the thing is that Sarah,
is
the-
now mainstream thinking. Probably
yeah, it is made. Sarah Hurdy plus the Hawks and grandmother. Well, not everybody believes it. I mean, people like, say, Richard Wrangham, who they're still very patriarchal, patrilocal. You know, there's still these models stubbornly sitting in there that patriarchy and patrilocality is ancestral to humans. But basically, Sarah Hurdy and the Hawks grandmother are kind of really explode those ideas. And I was going to say, Sarah Hurdy was using it to explain our emotional modernity. That whereas great apes are very good at reading, mind reading another ape to understand what they're going to do next, they do not want their own mind to be read by others because there's too much Machiavellian competition. It's known as Machiavellian intelligence. We, by contrast, I'm not saying we aren't Machiavellian a lot of the time too, but we also have intersubjectivity. So we want to look into each other's eyes to understand so I want to know what you're feeling about what I'm saying. I want to know whether you're paying attention and can you see what I'm thinking about and what I'm pointing to, joint attention, all of that, intersubjectivity. And Sarah Hurdy has this beautiful, simple idea that where does it start from? Babysitting. The ability to hand over an offspring to somebody else. Great apes can't do it. And the one reason they can't do it is because females do not live with their relatives. That is the fundamental reason. Or except in very exceptional circumstances, do bonobos or chimps or gorillas live with their female relatives. So this is suggesting—
don't trust anyone else to hold their baby.
It's just too risky to let somebody else take that incredibly valuable investment of that valuable baby to somebody that do you trust them or not? So in our evolutionary past, the likelihood that female kin, and especially in the first place, mother's mother, grandmother hypothesis idea, let's just see a little bit more on grandmother hypothesis and where it came from. This is that picture's a lovely Hadza grandmother, Lumbi, showing off her grandchildren at Siponga camp some many years ago. Lumbi will not be with us anymore. But Kristen Hawkes, Jim O'Connell and Nick Lurden-Jones developed the grandmother model from their work with the Hadza hunter-gatherers in Tanzania. It started from observations of the incredible amount of hard work that Hadza grandmothers in their 60s, I've seen them working away, digging roots and doing hard work, foraging, and bringing that back as staple food for young children. And these are weaned children. Now, this argument was very much based in life history theory, working with people like Eric Charnoff, the key life history theorists. And we've got to think about what the key principle in life history theory is. If you're talking about grandmother living longer, we're talking about post-reproductive lifespans. You can't have a longer lifespan unless you can reduce mortality risk. If you're going to delay sexual maturity and start sexual reproduction later, you can't do that if you're going to die before you get there. So, factors of life history are absolutely determinant on length of lifespan, and they're fundamentally determinant on the risk of mortality, risk of dying. So how does the grandmother operate to reduce that risk of dying and then enable the life history to start getting pulled out to produce very much the features of human life history, the very special features of human life history? human babies, obviously incredibly costly, even more costly energetically than killer whale babies, or certainly than chimpanzee babies with their very large brains that they're growing. We are surprisingly early in being weaned. So we heard killer whales have interbirth intervals 4 or 5 years. Chimpanzees quite similar, breastfeeding 4 or 5 years. Orangutans can be like 7 or 8 years. For Hadza hunter-gatherers, it'll be like 2.5 years when the weaning happens. And it's quite a conflict of the child. I've watched some of the Hadza children getting weaned, and they don't want to be weaned from the mama's breast. But they are, and that's so early that children don't even have adult teeth to process diet. And being a child is actually, that is what being a child is. It's being weaned so early that it's before the teeth are there to process an adult diet. With chimpanzees or other primates, when a monkey or young ape is weaned, they are going to carry on as a juvenile, getting their own food. Human children don't do that. Somebody steps in to help them get that food. And that somebody, the most obvious candidate in the evolutionary past, is mother's mother as the key person. And certainly it is the case with the Hadza, that is who. Her work is very much taking the weaned child off from the mother's responsibility and working to feed that child. Now, Hawkes and her colleagues placed the context for that into like Homo erectus evolution about 2 to 1.5 million years ago, especially against a background of very drying climate, where basically a climate where dry season, wet season, during those dry seasons particularly, young children who've just been weaned, where are they going to find the food? How are they going to get the food? They're not able to. Therefore, grandma, who in those days already would be able to use digging sticks for getting roots and getting potential food and be able to process those, perhaps even be able to start cooking some of those. Fire is another issue. So they really put it onto Homo erectus evolution that this process would begin. Mothers would be selected to be living longer. They would be giving much more chances to the early weanlings of their daughters to survive better. And then if there's this reduction of mortality risk, then it's possible for Homo erectus to grow a bigger body with a delayed sexual maturity. So not to be reproducing as early as a chimpanzee, but delay sexual maturity to have a bigger body and then to be more successful in subsequent reproduction. And we developed something much more reminiscent. I mean, Homo erectus would be a bit of a halfway house before us or Neanderthals, but we developed something much more reminiscent of human life history. Beginnings of longer lifespans for older women, beginnings of childhood with this extended period after weaning when they're being supported, and beginnings of delayed sexual maturity. So yeah, that's the fundamental grandmother model. It parsimoniously, really neatly explains, wraps up all those life history features. And what Hawkes and O'Connell did is they assumed female philopatry means living with mum. Yeah. They assumed that because they were watching the Hadza, and the Hadza older women are very definitely likely to be living where their daughter is. So I was showing you Lumbi in the camp with her grandchildren, her daughter's grandchildren there. Just to show that, losing another life history chart for a hunter-gatherer population, Ashe, Paraguay, we can see that's the chimpanzee. And we can see the parameters of life history there. First birth chimp is 14. A few years later, that's the delay of sexual maturity, 18. Running through to the Ashe, last birth at 42. Chimp, last birth around 35 for a wild chimpanzee. After that, that wild mother, chimpanzee mother, is going to kind of die off as that offspring matures to become independent. But an Ashe mother has a life history, a life expectancy of over 20 years after that last birth. She's going to live into her mid-60s as an expectation, and it could be a longer lifespan than that. Okay, that is the difference. So that is what is really the difference there. A lot of literature has gone into looking at grandmother strategies and grandmother effects. Do grandmothers make a difference to the young offspring? Well, grandmothers can be helpful, or they can not be helpful. And of course, grandmothers come in two different kinds. There's the mother of the mum, and there's the mother of the dad. Okay, and mother's mother and mother-in-law strategies can be a lot different. There can be potentially different sort of genetic perspectives there. There's a literature around mothers-in-law where the mothers-in-law are not very beneficial to the daughters-in-law. They're mothers-in-law, mothers of sons who are married to their daughters-in-law. They may act as mate guards and really be doing very little except watching every move the daughter-in-law makes. They might, in polygynous societies, act to increase the son's mating opportunities and argue for the son to marry other wives or get increasing reproductive success that way. There's also plenty of examples of serious economic exploitation of daughters-in-law by older women in the family who have more authority in the family. And yeah, from a perspective of a sort of patrilineal perspective, if the mother-in-law of the daughter-in-law, the mother of the husband is there, if they think they can replace that daughter-in-law, if they work her too hard, if they get her to have babies too frequently, if they're, she's being kind of exploited reproductively and productively. This sounds very brutal, but there's a logic there. Well, there's other women out there to replace the daughter-in-law. But from the point of view of a matrilineal, the mother of a daughter, that is never true. You can't replace that daughter. You do not want to exploit that daughter in a way that she's having too many babies too quick. And there are data comparing, for instance, populations like Bengali with Kazi in Assam, India, to show the difference between those patrilineal and matrilineal strategies. However, there are conditions also where paternal grandmothers may be very caring and solicitous. And this is a historic example. In early French settlement, colonial settlement Quebec, late 17th to 18th century, where the people had immigrated to what became Canada, Quebec, and women, young women who could reproduce were very hard to find. In that case, the mother of a son who was married to a woman would be caring, solicitous, finding her resources, looking after her, because you can't replace her. Okay. We have examples where there is kinship residence that's patrilocal, residing with husband's kin, and yet mothers and daughters keep coming back together at critical moments. There's a beautiful paper on Himba pastoralists, Brooke Skelzer and Katie Hines' paper a couple of years ago, where mothers especially help their daughters during postpartum, just after birth, with resources, with cooking and care, and with teaching how to do breastfeeding and giving cultural knowledge. So they're doing all the things that we expect from grandmothers, passing down traditions. Rebecca Sear, Ruth Mace, colleagues here today. Rebecca Sear and Ruth Mace several years ago, Rebecca, who spoke with us last term, talking about who actually keeps children alive, And they were finding, looking at a review of literature on that, maternal grandmothers, MGMs, they're the most consistently helpful. In fact, the effect of maternal grandmothers was very often much more than fathers. Fathers might not be the father's fault. there weren't necessarily things that the fathers could do to change children's survival outcomes, but the maternal grandmothers were very consistent in providing support. So just very quickly before we come back to those models again and finish it off, yeah, some of the first studies that really showed what a difference grandmothers made, grandmother effects, were done by a Finnish team headed by Lahdenperä, looking at data. The Finland's parish records are absolutely meticulous, going back into early 19th century with births, marriages, deaths. And there was possible to find out all sorts of other information about where people were actually living. And these charts, this is Canadian farming, early farmers, pre-industrial farmers, Finnish peasantry, early pre-industrial peasantry. This is just showing lifespan for grandmother, the increase of the numbers of grandchildren. It's like the longer that woman survives, the more grandchildren there are going to be. And if you look into the Finnish data quite closely, now this is just looking at whether a mother of a parent, it didn't distinguish male or female, the mother of a parent, is she dead or is she alive? If she's alive, she is going to increase fecundity by, like as much as half a child extra. If she's alive, she's going to increase lifetime reproductive success very significantly. If she is local in that chart, she is going to increase the number of grandchildren by almost one extra grandchild there, if she's living close compared to if she's far, far away. If she's alive, she reduces the age of first reproduction, the age when a person has their first child, by 2 to 3 years, if she's alive. Okay. And then this was interesting, interbirth intervals, the effect on interbirth intervals. Basically, they could find out that that effect was only there for the first 3 children, between child 1 and 2, between child 2 and 3, that a mother being present reduced the interbirth interval. But why isn't she reducing it there? Because maybe she's just getting old and losing the effect. Okay. By children 3, 4, 5, 6, she's not so effective. And these charts are just showing that the bottom line, if the grandmother's dead, this is the lower chances of child survival over first 15 years. The dotted line is showing the much improved chances of child survival if the grandmother is younger than 60. Okay, so if age of first reproduction in these populations is like 25, 26, 27, grandmothers expecting to start kicking in just after menopause, basically, would be it. Okay, now these are they're Christian, sort of patrilocal, very sort of patriarchal, although they're Scandinavian population or Finnish population. So what about African foragers? And this is where you're going to maybe talk about living with mum. The evolutionary biologists who've done the whale models nearly always assume that our ancestors were patrilocal, and that fits their asymmetry cost model. Because if you've got a daughter-in-law coming into a group with an older female living there with her son, you're marrying into the son, that older female is obviously much more closely related to the rest of the group. As she's got older, she's become much more closely related to the rest of the group. Whereas you're a new young daughter-in-law, you're not related to any of that group. So you will be, in terms of reproductive conflict, you're going to be winning that, while she is worried about the whole of the rest of the group. The flaw in that argument, even though patrilocality would fit asymmetry of costs, is that when we look at African hunter-gatherers, I'm looking here at the Hadza grandma here, their marriage patterns, their residence patterns do not fit a patrilocal model at all. And we've got quite a lot of data. We've got data in population genetics demonstrating a difference between how hunter-gatherers have residence and farmers. Hunter-gatherers being much more mothers, close to daughters, close to daughters, close to daughters, down long generation DNA lineages. Similarly, in Khoisan genetics between pastoralists and hunter-gatherer Khoisan. And with the Hadza, we just have residence, we have long-term residence data back from the late great James Woodburn's material on Hadza residential groups. So he gave us, with his PhD, good record of Hadza residence and kinship. And more recently, of course, Hawkes, Blurton, Nick Blurton-Jones, looking at the residence data and how, where are mothers in relation to mothers often going to where the daughter that needs them the most, living there. Brian Wood and Frank Marlowe have a picture of post-marital residence that potentially Hadza mother and daughter will be together in the same camp for the first couple of children. And then maybe if the guy is reliable enough, it's okay, he might take her away to, but it's only temporary because these camps, he might take her to his kin and she might be residing patrilochi, but it'll still be temporary. Hadza camps are incredibly fluid and flexible. It's very hard to be describing them as matrilocal, matrilineal, but they have that tendency, they have that core. And one thing they certainly aren't is patrilocal, that's for sure. Do you want to say more about living with mum before we
just to emphasize what Camilla's just said? I mean, a bunch of us, me, Camilla, Ian Watts in radical anthropology, we were in Liverpool for one of the conferences of hunter-gatherer societies. When was it? About 2013, okay. And there's a bunch of geneticists present at the conference.
This was Paul Verdu.
Paul Verdu, okay. And what we realized was that, I mean, I've always said, I said in my book, Blood Relations, published in 1991, and we'd all, in our group, we just knew somehow that if early human residence patterns weren't matrilocal, well, we were so wrong that, I mean, I should have done something else with my life. I was supposed to be an anthropologist. But now we knew there was going to be proof, because these were geneticists who worked out a new way. It's kind of what's called paleogenetics, of determining things which in the past we thought we couldn't really know about. And so I remember we were all kind of nervous. We were, what are they going to come out with? They were looking at hunter-gatherers versus farmers and cattle herders in Africa. And they were looking at the difference between the mid-DNA lineages and the nuclear DNA lineages. So if women were moving out, what you'd find is in particular areas, you'd get consistency through the male line, whereas if women were staying together while men had to move out to get married, then of course through the mitochondrial line, because mid-DNA is transmitted only through females, you'd find little clusters of particular types of genes,
highly localized.
Okay. So I remember we're just saying, well, what are they going to come out with? What are they come out with? And of course, I mean, here we have it. It turned out that we don't know quite how long, but certainly over long periods of time, probably thousands of years, women in Africa, if they were hunters and gatherers, they were living with mum down the generations. But on the other hand, if they were farmers, it was the other way around, because with farmers, it's the men who tend to live with their dads, stay with their dad, as the women have to move out, and we get the opposite pattern. So we were obviously pretty relieved. But what I wanted to say now is just that, I mean, first of all, Lucy Cook in her book, she's, as Camilla said, she's a zoologist. She's not all that good on humans, certainly not hunter-gatherers. And when she's dealing with the killer whales and using the killer whales as a kind of model for how menopause evolved in humans, she makes an assumption, which is the general assumption, and it's wrong. And the assumption is, okay, we humans are great apes. And with great apes, what happens is that as either sex comes of age, what they have to do, either the male moves out or the female moves out. So we have, and with a little bit annoying with primatology, instead of using the term matrilocal residence, they talk about female philopatry. So the females love their country and the females stay put. And if it's on the other hand, patrilocal, they use the term male philopatry. So the males stay put. And the idea was that with great apes, great apes are male philopatric. And you will still hear that great apes are male philopatric, males stay locally together, the females have to move out. And the argument is, and this part of it is kind of right, why does a female chimp move out to have sex? Probably the reason is because she doesn't want to be harassed by her brother, her older brother, and her father, because with chimps, unfortunately, of course, from a human point of view, the male will coerce the female to have sex. We don't want to call it rape because they're animals and it's probably not the right term. But the point is that the female can't always get some allied females to resist having coercive sex perpetrated on her, harassment and sex by a male relative, an older or more powerful male relative. So she just gets the hell out of there. And then, but when the female chimpanzee does move out, she finds herself in somebody else's territory. She's got no relatives. She could be harassed. Maybe her baby will be killed. Infanticide is very common, actually. Even the neighboring females may kill a baby, let alone what will happen to the male. So the moving out from the point of view of a young female about to get pregnant. It's all sorts of costs, but she has to sort of weigh up the costs and benefits, and it may be better than having coercive sex with somebody who just doesn't want to have sex with, a brother or a father. So anyway, the doctrine is that we are great apes, and great apes are male philopatric, great apes are patrilocal. Therefore, we must be patrilocal. And you will hear it so confidently asserted that even Lucy Cook, who knows a thing or two,
Richard Wrangham,
we can go through a name of people who just make
Nicola
this.
Rehani.
And as I said, if that's true, then my book's completely wrong. But on the other hand, as I said, for humans, it's wrong. But so I'm writing another book with Jerome Lewis, and we're interested in whether it's even true of the great apes. And I'll just read out a little bit from the chapter on living with mum in this other book I'm writing with Jerome. It's about the origin of language, actually, but we're not trying to explain language independently. We think the language emerged as a result of all kinds of other social things happening. So apart from being falsified by both ethnographic and genetic data, the assumption of great ape early human male philopatry fails to find support even from primatology. As soon as we closely examine great ape residential choices, it turns out that although male philopatry may prevail in some cases and is perhaps the majority pattern, there's certainly no fixed patrilocal rule. What we find instead are variable preferences and tendencies ranging from strongly male bias to strongly female bias patterns of dispersal. So let's start with orangutans, who spend much of their life in trees. Both sexes emigrate, but do so in contrasting ways. Far from males remaining attached to their natal home, which you'd expect if it was male philopatry, it's the males who move furthest away. Young males leave their natal areas before they start reproducing and are classified as long-distance dispersers. There's no evidence that they form coalitions or maintain social bonds, so we would not expect male philopatry. Neither sex is very sociable or gregarious, and mature females are especially intolerant of unrelated females who might be tempted to stray into the natal area and compete for food. Upon reaching adulthood, however, female orangutans settle within reach of their mother's home range and continue to maintain close bonds with their mother. Mothers have been observed foraging close to one another as the infants play together. So that's the orangutans. It's just not male philopatry. Let's turn to gorillas. Females are more likely to leave than males, sometimes getting pregnant in various places. Where resources are scarce, more females may choose to stay in their mother's territory. Some adult males choose to remain at home in a subordinate position to the silverback, alert to his weaknesses and waiting for their chance. An alternative strategy for a subordinate male is to move away and try to entice females to join him. Bachelor males may spend time together in an all-male troop, occasionally engaging in homosexual interactions. Finally, because this is what people are most interested, we turn to our closest great ape relatives, the common chimpanzees. In rich tropical rainforests, such as the Thai forest in West Africa, females will forage quite closely to one another and support each other if they're attacked by a male. Where trees are scrubby and resources correspondingly scarce, as they tend to be where Jane Goodall did her work in the Gombe stream, females forage in isolation. They don't want to be close to each other because each female wants to keep control of her own access to food, and she doesn't want too much competition. But paradoxically, it's precisely under these conditions that we also find striking instances of female philopatry and even powerful and enduring matrilineages. Now, this is the next bit, is the important bit. The famous F family in the Kasakala community at Gombe. That's where Jane Goodall did her work, and where Richard Wrangham did his work as well under Jane Goodall. provides a good illustration of the benefit to a young chimpanzee mother of remaining with mum, remaining with her own mother instead of emigrating. Flo was one of the first chimpanzees identified by Jane Goodall in 1962. Thought to be in her 40s at the time, she had already reared 5 offspring. She had a son who became an alpha male and a daughter who remained with her. This daughter, Fifi, reaped the rewards of staying close to her mother, going on to become a matriarch in her own right. She eventually gave birth to 9 offspring, making her the most successful wild chimpanzee mother ever known. I could go on and unpack all this, but I'm just saying, with chimpanzees, it all depends. It depends. Females will come together. If there's enough food around, they'll form alliances. They'll be able to beat off some male who's harassing them. On the other hand, if there's not much food, each female tends to want her own little cabbage patch, as it were. They're isolated. The males can dominate them. It all depends on circumstances. And what we're arguing is, of course, in the course of human evolution, again, it must have depended on circumstances. The idea that there's a kind of a rule, everything has to be patrilocal because you're an ape, or everything has to be patrilocal because you're a human, which is still around, by the way, is complete and utter nonsense.
Thank you. So just really quickly end off here with what these models are adding up to. Just thinking about the whale species that have the post-reproductive lifespan and humans, there's similarities. They're very large brains, particularly for killer whales, these extremely sophisticated, culturally transmitted and learned over long periods collective hunting strategies, so that there are these ecotype or eco-species killer whales doing different types of hunting. As Attenborough was saying about the Weddell Sea killers, there's like 100 of them that know those techniques out of all the killer whales on the planet. The Seattle southern resident killers are the expert salmon hunters, and they won't even hunt anything else. It's a really difficult thing for them because they're losing the stocks of salmon, and they don't seem to be shifting their strategies to look for different resources. It's like so culturally important part of their know-how that they don't. Okay, so is there any part, I mean, we are saying that this prejudice that humans had an ancestral condition of patrilocality isn't actually standing up, then can we have any kind of similarity in terms of kinship structure with the whales that have post-reproductive lifespans? Another difference with the whales is they do not. There's absolutely no type of male provisioning with whales, which is of course a difference between human hunter-gatherers and whales. Forms of matrilocality with matriline tendency. I mean, the thing that's argued with the asymmetry of cost is that mothers have to have son and daughter in the camp. They've got to have both of those to have this effect of the cost, the relatedness increasing as the female ages. Now, actually, I knew herds of women who had sons and daughters in the camp. The son might go off to do bride service with a woman in another camp, but he'd often come back to reside where his mother was. And if we think about the situation of Homo erectus with the beginnings of cooperative breeding and the beginnings of grandmother strategies, it's entirely possible that as daughters and mothers are sticking together with stacked families closer together, you'd get brothers with delayed sexual maturity there in the camp. So this strategy could potentially be an ancestral form. There's also multilocality, very famously described by Frank Marlowe. Hunter-gatherer specialists today do not think of hunter-gatherers being patrilocal bands. They think of multilocality, sometimes duolocality, and that life history effect of moving from being with mom to maybe later stages when maybe mom's older, you're going to husband's kin. So it's a life history effect. The important bit with the asymmetry of costs is males mating outside the group. But then you could have that with sort of matrilineal clan formations where you go and visit the other clan. The visiting kind of husband idea would be possible. The asymmetry of cost model works where there's patrilocality, but we don't believe that's an ancestral condition for humans, or some form of matriarchy, mothers with both sons and daughters there, males mating somehow outside. And some version of this, some messy, not very clearly understood version of this may be very much part of the ancestry of humans and may still be illustrated among human hunter-gatherers to this day. We should say about patrilocality, if the grandmother strategies of humans evolved from mothers with sons, one of the difficult stumbling blocks is that men reproduce about 3 or 4 or 5 years later than women do, which implies that the grandmothers would have to be living like a whole jump of 3, 4, 5 years older to have an effect compared to the mother of the mother, because women will reproduce sooner. So now we are thinking about, I don't know if Chris wants to say any last thing about patriarchal bands, but in a few weeks' time, we're going to be doing a thought experiment on early human kinship as a workshop. So we want everybody here to come back and think more about this, you know, what could these forms be? And can you tell us what the name of that workshop is, Chris? It's a bit shocking.
A little bit nervous.
It's
a thought experiment. It's a thought experiment. And what we do, we just ask you in a workshop, just forget morality completely. There's no morality. You don't have to respect your mother-in-law. You can even have sex with brothers and sisters. I mean, and just forget morality entirely. But what you've got to realize is that we're thinking about becoming human. For hunters and gatherers, a long time ago, there's no such thing as money. Okay, there's no such thing as money, but you can have other kind of rewards and incentives other than money, of course. And all out there, the only thing out there to eat is stuff which is like doesn't move because it's rooted to the ground, vegetables and trees and fruit and stuff, all kinds of food that will, you know, run around or swim around. And on the other hand, you've got time organized, and I mean, you've got the sun.
Yeah. Okay.
And you've got
So
the moon.
what's it called? This experiment?
I'm going to say no.
Be bold.
How to run a brothel. Now,
It's a thought experiment on kinship, sex, and economics.
what's going to happen as you think about it, you'll just realize increasingly that the only thing which will work down the generations is nothing whatever like a brothel. But the idea is to make you sort of generate morality, actually the most moral system the world has ever known, I would argue, just sort of on a logical basis. And it's by refusing to assume the kinds of morals that, you know, all the world's religions nowadays assume, and we naturally assume. I mean, of course you're not going to have sex with your sister or brother and all that stuff, but I'm just simply saying,
but why not?
don't exactly ask why not.
Why not?
Where does it come from? I mean, if incest isn't all that, you don't kind of particularly want to have sex with somebody you've lived with all your life. I mean, I don't know, why would you have a cultural rule against it? I mean, we'll go into all those things, but I'm just saying, you just start with sun, moon, vegetables, animals, males, females, old people, younger people, blah, 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 make it work. And what you'll come up with will be matrilocal residence, something veering.
Well, we'll see what people come up with.
Okay.
But the point is that you can really think about what are these possible ancestral conditions for kinship. I just want one last, if that's the last thing, because we've run too long. Oh, we've run very long, I'm sorry. Doing too much whale biology. Beluga, rather than killers being the way to go, beluga whales seem to be the way to go. They seem to have extraordinarily huge multi-level societies. They've just realized they're not necessarily as matrilineal as all that. Beluga whales, there's a matrifocal tendency, but beluga whales do a lot of stuff with non-relatives. And there may even be sometimes keeping company with paternal relatives. There may even be a role of grandfathers with belugas. Belugas have incredibly sophisticated cultural communication strategies. They're much bigger, much more widespread communities than the killer whales, in fact.
Songs.
The songs, yeah, they have the most sophisticated song systems for any whale. They have some fantastic, they go over incredible distances.
They keep in touch with relatives and non-relatives.
Yeah, relatives and non-relatives.
They've got mobile phones. They can keep
Yeah.
in touch with everybody.
So that it's quite possible that matrilineal relatives are keeping in touch with each other and crying for help, you know, help, I need you. And yeah, they can move, travel incredible distances. We've got to think about Homo erectus being, when Homo erectus evolves, it starts, well, it moves outside Africa right across the old world. We're looking at almost an oceanic, in terms of the landscape, an oceanic species like belugas. So, and these, there is one other model of hunter-gatherers that was developed here at UCL with Mark Dibble and Abby Page. Egalitarianism in hunter-gatherers, which is very much emphasized, means that each person has the choice of where they live. And if a married couple, they kind of want to live with their relatives, a woman wants to live near her relatives, a man wants to live near his, what ends up, the outcome is that the camp actually, most of them are not relatives. And they might have a few relatives each, kind of thing. So that's kind of the egalitarian solution. And that's much more like what's seen with belugas. And the thing about that, and I would think that this is a relevant, if maybe something matrilineal was relevant for Homo erectus, that this would be relevant for us in the last 500,000 years. And why? Because if you are having to negotiate social relationships a lot with non-relatives, you've got to develop cultural mechanisms for doing that. And especially, we would think about ritual. We would think about all the evidence of ritual traditions that are rising for Homo sapiens ancestry in the last 300, 400,000 years. That would be
all the singing,
part of
all
that.
the dancing, all the
Singing,
bonding.
dancing, all the all the ochre. We know what the actual evidence is on ritual. So this is another possibility that rather than killers.
I mean, one more important point, which is partly Camilla's idea, but we did a little intervention in, was it behavioural and brain sciences?
We were talking about whale societies.
And we were, yes, and which is that with Homo erectus was about 2 million years ago, when we become obligate bipeds, 1.5 million years ago. Okay, so but the point is that once we're obligate bipeds, we suddenly become non-territorial. We can move over vast distances because it's such an efficient way of moving around. Yeah. So that what we had in common with the killer whales and other whales is this non-territorialism. So, but if you're in a territory and keep to that territory, then the local landscape, the local territory is kind of your external memory. You're constantly reminded of things by this particular waterhole, this particular tree, these rocks, these contours, and so on. So, you know, you've got that to rely on. But as soon as you're moving around all the time, somehow you've got to keep all that cultural knowledge in your head. And that's one of the reasons why these grandmothers are so important, because there has to be a few people who just got incredible memories, incredible knowledge, because you've got to keep that knowledge wherever you are. The local landscape won't help you because you're constantly in a new place.
If you're moving rapidly.
Well, I think that's
it. Yeah, I think we've covered that subject. Sorry about that.
Patience.
Thank you. Have a bit of time for questions. I'm sorry I've run rather late, but we'd welcome any questions, thoughts. Yes. Anyone in the room with ideas, or else anybody on Zoom, please raise hand or let me know. Stunned everyone into silence. We've got some amazing, the Ruthme's colleagues here, research on the mosswort with, is it Chachahe? And this paper has just been published by Wan Chen about matrilocality, or about the different types of residence and the effect on sex equality. I don't know if you want to say anything. We'd love you to come and talk to Brad about it.
About the difference of techniques affect the individual workload. So actually we found under matriarchy, only in matriarchy now we work like similar amount of work.
Can I just repeat for the Zoom? You're saying that only when residence is matrilocal do the men pull their weight and work hard. And as soon as it's the other way around, and the man has got a woman with him, and he doesn't have to work so hard. He doesn't have. Is that what you're saying? The maximum amount of work comes from men when they have to sort of earn their keep by, because they're with their. Is that? Am I getting it right there?
They're living with his the in-laws.
Yeah, kind of.
The man's dispersing. The man is made.
Now, some now, like, they don't have enough bottom color, so they have to like work hard to gain some.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, to leave what he is what.
Okay, that's obviously
This
going to be a
this is a
critically important
historic.
historic.
meeting. This is fantastic.
Yeah, and of course,
Fantastic.
what Ruth Mace does is she makes sure that everything's rigorous, everything's logical, everything's the statistics are. So you're very lucky to be with.
Have done the hard work. I think.
They've done the hard work for yeah.
And. Mhm.
Well done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take both. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Good.
Yeah, we'd love you guys to come and talk about your work. Really good.
So and we'll circulate the paper as well. Obviously.
Yeah. Yes,
on the right
that's
website,
just been published. It's out on Rad Twitter. We were putting it out today. We saw that. Yeah, so yeah, really worth looking out for that.
Right.
Any other questions? Somebody might have some.
It's all a bit complicated, I agree, and it's hard to ask a question and not feel that you're. I mean, I find it a bit. I find Camilla's stuff rather difficult, like getting my head around it all. So, so I don't blame you if you. But I mean,
Well, I would say, if you could get hold of this wonderful book to read before Lucy Cook comes along, and we actually. If you really can't afford it and want to, you can contact us to get it. But yeah, this is a good intro. It's a very nice intro, but it's also kind of contradictory because they say, oh, well, the whales are doing this, but then, oh, we were patrilocal in the past, but we can do it too. The one thing about patrilocality, that patrilocality fits for menopause means that if you evolve menopause under something that's not patrilocal, it's more matrilocal, matrifocal. But then you switch over to becoming patrilocal with farming or with other circumstances. There's still the selection pressure of menopause. It never goes away. It's still there. So that's
so
that's
farming
important part of farming doesn't mean
can't give rise to menopause, but it can benefit from it, or it can menopause can be supported by it.
It will sustain the selection pressure there. So that won't change. Yeah.
Is there a correlation with extreme environments in these whales? So it seems like it's the Arctic whales that are having more. I mean, all of the species that you mentioned are in the Arctic
or Antarctic.
Sorry.
Yeah, there is extreme
ice.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of the narwhals and belugas. That is definitely the case.
Yeah.
The southern resident killers are on have a real knife edge of energy and resources. People need to do research between the short fin and the long fin, because why is that different?
Yeah.
What's causing that?
Yeah.
That could be very interesting to work it out. But what is also why are elephants not, because elephants have all this structure of grandmother repository of cultural knowledge to find the food in tough times, but of course elephant food is not carnivorous food, it's herbivorous food. Elephants don't require these incredibly sophisticated hunting techniques to get that. So there's something about that. There's something about that, about the super flexibility of foraging techniques and cultural learning required to make those techniques work. Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah.
We've had an hour and a half, but Stephen wants to ask a question.
Steve, yeah.
Dasha has also got her hand up, Camilla.
Thank you. Sorry, Stephen. Yeah.
Would you like to adumbrate on the bits in between, like Heidelberg and Neanderthal.
I don't know about Heidelbergensis these days.
Covered stalactites and things.
Oh no, I'm not going to go into that because that's far too much to say. But if there is, I mean, at the moment, I don't believe there's any patrilocal species that evolved menopause. But the only possible candidate, I think, is Neanderthals, because there is genetic evidence on Neanderthals that their females are moving to where males are. Now, I can think of reasons why that is, even if Homo erectus did have the tendency of females staying with mum. Suppose Neanderthal grandma, there just weren't enough grandmothers because older females were dying too young. There's not much reason for a female to stay with her mum. Their mums are there. She might be moving to the males instead. So Neanderthals they are strange, and they seem to contrast with what the evidence of African hunter-gatherers is. And this might be a significant difference between us and Neanderthals. Of course, Neanderthals may not have been always the same, but we have this genetic evidence in Neanderthals in Spain and in far Siberia, actually. So yeah, Neanderthals are interesting. I would think it's been a case of an earlier form of life history evolution from Neanderthal ancestry, Homo erectus, and Neanderthals switched back into patriarchy.
We've got very little time left, but Dasha.
Dasha, yes, Dasha.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. Just a kind of broader question. When I bring up our past and matrilineal past and the evolved nest and all that, I get pushback from scholars across fields saying, why worry about that? We've evolved into patrilocality and patriarchy, and that's the way it should be, right? So it's the tyranny of the present. Yes, it's a moral argument, really, but they just say, oh, that's just the way it is. It's evolution at work. How do you push back?
Well, look at the horrendous mess the world is in terms of, I mean, the era of patriarchy coincides with what? Warfare, rape, slavery. I mean, never mind the impacts on, I mean, your own work on impacts of childcare, of very patriarchal system, and what that does to our psychology. That I don't see any reason at all in a modern, I mean, hunter-gatherers in many ways have many aspects of modernity in terms of their fluidity and flexibility, in terms of their what should I say? I mean, we could if you want to think about evolving ways of being hunter-gatherers again, but on a kind of different level of type of subsistence and production, I think it's entirely reasonable. You never, when time spent with the Hadza hunter-gatherers, they just seem like they're sort of messy step families and messy types of interrelationships, very fluid, very flexible, seemed incredibly modern. It doesn't seem at all as though it's something way in the past.
Every time we've been on a climate camp or a big action against the G20 or whatever it is, or some huge corporate conference, when we all meet and have our discussions, you just, I don't know, it's just nobody's allowed to hog the floor. Nobody's more important than anyone else. Everyone's going to be respectful and kind of, hear everyone else. I don't know. You suddenly feel, this is how things should be, because there's a lot of laughter and everyone's kind of relaxed. No one's telling anyone else what to do. No one's got some special theory that everyone's going to listen to. But when I was with the Hadza, I wasn't with them very long, but Camilla did some field work, and then Mariki did, of course, a bit more field work with one of our students. When you're with the Hadza, you just feel, yeah, it's very, very similar. Everyone's sort of relaxed. No one's pulling weight. No one's telling anyone else what to do. There's huge amounts of laughter. And decisions get made through the sort of chemical molecular process of reaching some kind of consensus. You don't have votes, you don't have majorities and minorities, but somehow everyone sort of agrees this is the way, this is what we're going to, this is where the new place we're going to move to, or whatever it is. And by the way, that will always be the women that make that decision, but not because the women sort of, you know, dominate over the men. It's just because the women have kind of got more sense and have sort of talk to each other a bit more, and got, I don't know, somehow women make critical decisions, and are certainly heard just as much as the men are, except when, of course, when some administrator turns up and asks, who's your headman, who's in charge here.
Yeah, well, of course, those systems get eroded incredibly quickly with effects of cash economy and neoliberalism and of course that but in terms of a sustainable future, the flexibility, the collective decision making, egalitarianism, and just sheer kind of joy of living, we have to be able to learn from the experts. And it shouldn't be hard for us, because our species life, we've evolved all those characteristics. They are part of our nature, so it shouldn't be hard for us to retrain our brains and retrain our hearts and souls in certain ways. I think you did it. It's a great question, though. It's a great question.
One typical response is, well, look at how many there are of us humans. Isn't that reproductive success? Isn't that the greatest thing? You know, it's like,
yeah, well, but who's lasted the longest, the generations, the sustainability? Which society is the most stable and sustainable? Because we're not going to last much longer this rate. It's not going to happen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dasha.
I think we've got to stop.
Yeah, and this is burning more questions in the room. I think we better wind up. And thank you to everyone on the Zoom. Just to say, next week, Chris is again going to come back with a quite different subject, but not unrelated, on the dragon. This is the dragon.
So why in world mythology, including places where you don't even have snakes, let alone dragons, why do we have this creature which is called the dragon, or the rainbow snake, or the great serpent, or the cosmic serpent, or this, you know, why are dragons so central in mythology? What exactly is a dragon?
Yeah, what is dragon?
So
we're going to have Chris on dragons next week. So I hope you're going to come back for some more. And I'm going to say goodbye to people on Zoom. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your questions, Dasha and all. Goodbye.